In the grand theater of human history, few nations have risen with the sheer force, speed, and scale of the United States of America. Today, it stands as the richest and most powerful country the world has ever known, a titan of influence, innovation, and ambition. But its rise was never guaranteed. In fact, for more than 100 years after its discovery, the lands that would one day define global destiny were dismissed as empty, unimportant, and utterly forgettable. Yet, destiny often hides in the shadows of neglect. Before America was America, before its shores echoed with the footsteps of settlers, dreamers, and revolutionaries, there existed a world convinced that the map of Earth was nearly complete. A world where Europe looked outward with hunger, seeking new routes, new treasures, new kingdoms to conquer. Their gaze was fixed not on the cold, uncharted lands of the West, but on the ancient, wealthy empires of the East. And then came an age of mistaken beliefs and accidental discoveries. Just before Columbus set sail, the world's map still showed blank oceans stretching endlessly into mystery. Somewhere on those margins, the Vikings whispered of a distant island, a rugged piece of land glimpsed centuries earlier. But no one imagined it was part of a hidden continent larger than all of Europe combined. To the Old World, America simply did not exist. What followed would reshape civilization. Driven by the dream of reaching Asia, Christopher Columbus embarked westward across the Atlantic. He believed he would cross an ocean and arrive at the markets of India, where spices glimmered like gold. Instead, he stepped ashore on islands of the Caribbean, lush, humid, intoxicating places unlike anything in European memory. He found no spices, no silk, no empires of the East, but he returned to Spain with stories and with gold. Spain listened, Spain acted, and Spain conquered. As Europe realized that something enormous lay across the sea, a fierce and sudden rivalry ignited. Spain and Portugal divided the unknown world with a single audacious line drawn across a map. One half to Portugal, one half to Spain. With that stroke of ink, the fate of continents was rewritten. Spain rushed southward into the glittering heartlands of the Americas, gathering gold, silver, and souls. Their empire expanded with relentless energy, but the cold forests and empty plains of North America held little appeal. These lands, rich in resources yet untouched by European imagination, slumbered quietly in the background, still unseen, still unwanted, still waiting. But history has a way of rewarding the patient. While Spain built its empire, England watched from afar. Its explorers touched the edges of North America decades before the Spanish ever reached Florida. And then, inexplicably, England paused. Nearly a century passed before the English made another true attempt at colonization. Their first settlement vanished mysteriously. Their second barely survived. But slowly, steadily, the British presence grew, and soon the Atlantic coast began to transform into a chain of fragile new societies. And as Europe scrambled for control, another power emerged silently from the north. France, laying claim to the vast middle of the continent, from cold rivers to endless plains. It was a world primed for conflict. By 1754, the stage was set for a collision of empires, France, Britain, and the indigenous nations who fought for their homelands. A war erupted, one that would redraw the map and push the British to dominance across North America. But victory came at a cost that Britain demanded its colonies repay. And that was the spark. Taxes led to anger, anger to protest, protest to rebellion. Until finally, on a July day in 1776, the world heard a daring proclamation: the American colonies declared independence. Yet independence was only the beginning, because the nation they created, fragile, divided, uncertain, nearly failed before it ever had the chance to rise. This is the story of how a handful of scattered colonies transformed into a continental giant. How chance, conflict, ambition, and unimaginable opportunity propelled the United States from obscurity to empire. This is the untold cinematic history of America's rise. The newly independent United States emerged victorious from its Revolutionary War. But beneath the celebration lay a grim truth. The young nation was falling apart. 13 former colonies, now calling themselves states, behaved less like a united country and more like separate nations loosely tied by hope alone. Their first attempt at government was weak, chaotic, and rapidly failing. But from this turbulence came a moment of reinvention, a new constitution, a stronger federal government, and a leader who embodied unity itself. George Washington, elected the first president of the United States in 1789. Yet even under Washington's steady hand, America remained small, a narrow strip of territory hugging the Atlantic Ocean. The vast interior of the continent still belonged to Spain, native nations, or powers across the sea. The new republic's future depended on expansion, but expansion demanded opportunity. Opportunity arrived from an unexpected place. Across the Atlantic, Europe was shaking under the footsteps of a man whose ambition towered over empires, Napoleon Bonaparte. He seized power in France, dreamed boldly, and reached for influence on a global scale. In secret, he struck a deal with Spain to regain control of the Louisiana Territory, a colossal stretch of land reaching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Napoleon imagined an American empire of his own, but history had other plans. The United States desperately needed access to the Mississippi River, the lifeline of its trade, its farmers, its economy. If Napoleon controlled that river, he could choke America's future before it even began. And so, with caution and urgency, the United States made a simple proposal: sell us just the city of New Orleans. Napoleon considered the offer, and then stunned the world. He agreed not only to sell New Orleans, but the entire Louisiana Territory. For $15 million, America purchased a landmass so enormous that it instantly doubled the size of the nation. A single deal, perhaps the greatest real estate purchase in human history, changed America forever. Populations surged. Families with 7, 8, even 9 children looked westward toward endless horizons. Settlers crossed rivers, forests, and mountains in search of land and promise. But the story of American expansion was never simple. It collided with the complex realities of indigenous nations whose homelands were centuries old. The frontier was not empty, yet settlers claimed it as destiny. By 1819, another bold purchase followed: Florida, bought from Spain. And just as one empire faded from North America, another began rebuilding itself. Mexico won independence from Spain and inherited vast lands across the Southwest. Lands rugged, beautiful, and sparsely populated. Mexico needed settlers. America had settlers to spare. Soon Americans flooded into the Mexican region of Texas, outnumbering the local population. Tensions rose, cultures clashed, and a new rebellion ignited. Texas broke away, declaring itself an independent republic, a nation of cowboys, wide plains, and bold dreams. But Texas also brought a deep complication: slavery. When Texas first asked to join the Union, the United States hesitated. Admitting another slaveholding territory could destabilize a nation already divided over the issue. But in 1845, America changed course. Texas entered the Union, and war soon followed. The Mexican-American War was swift, brutal, and decisive. In its aftermath, Mexico ceded its northern territories, lands that would become California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. 5 years later, the United States purchased yet another slice of land from Mexico, solidifying its southern border. Meanwhile, in the north, the British and Americans peacefully settled the Oregon boundary, dividing the vast region at the 49th parallel. In just 50 years, the United States had expanded from a thin coastal nation to a continent-spanning power stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But the promise of new land could not disguise the nation's deepest wound. Gold was discovered in California. Prosperity surged in Oregon. The young republic stood poised for greatness. Yet inside its borders, a conflict as old as its founding was about to explode. In the industrial North, slavery had been abolished, seen as morally unbearable and incompatible with the nation's ideals. In the agricultural South, slavery was woven into the economic fabric and fiercely defended. Decades of argument, compromise, and political pressure built like a storm at sea. And then got the lightning strike. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln became president. Many in the South believed his victory meant the end of slavery. State after state seceded, forming a new nation, the Confederacy. The American Civil War had begun. 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed followed. Cities burned, families shattered. More Americans died in that war than in any conflict before or since. But the Union prevailed. Slavery was abolished, and the fractured United States stitched itself back together. A new chapter of expansion soon followed. As the nation healed, another extraordinary purchase emerged. Russia, worried that it could not defend distant Alaska, offered it for sale. After tense negotiations, the United States bought Alaska for $7 million, a price critics mocked as folly, unaware of the gold, oil, and strategic power that region held. But America's gaze had begun shifting toward the Pacific, toward islands, toward influence, toward the wider world. Hawaii, a chain of tropical islands rich in sugar and strategic position, became the center of American attention. Businessmen seized control, leaders debated. Should the United States expand beyond the continent? Should it shape the Pacific? Or should it stay true to its early promise of avoiding foreign entanglements? That question would soon be forced by events far from Hawaii, in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, where the final embers of the Spanish Empire still burned, and the answer would change America's standing forever. By the late 19th century, the world was shifting, and the United States, once a distant observer in global affairs, now stood at a crossroads. The question that had haunted every president since the nation's birth resurfaced once more. Should America remain isolated, or should it rise as a global power? The answer arrived not through philosophy, but through fire. Cuba was ablaze with a struggle for independence. Spain clung fiercely to its remaining colonies. Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, remnants of an empire built centuries earlier by Christopher Columbus. The American public watched closely, stirred by sympathy, outrage, and a growing sense of destiny. Then, a spark touched the powder keg. An American warship mysteriously exploded in Havana Harbor. No one knew the true cause, but the shockwave shook the nation. Within weeks, the United States issued an ultimatum. Spain must leave Cuba. Spain refused. War followed. The Spanish-American War lasted only months, but its consequences echoed across the globe. The United States seized Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines with decisive speed. In just one conflict, the old Spanish Empire collapsed, and a new power stepped into the light. During the chaos of war, another key decision was made. Hawaii was annexed, transforming it into a vital naval base in the heart of the Pacific. The American frontier, once defined by prairies and mountains, now stretched across oceans. And then, tragedy. President William McKinley, who had led the nation through victory, was assassinated. His death brought a surprising new leader to the presidency, Theodore Roosevelt, energetic, bold, and fiercely determined. Roosevelt saw America not as a regional nation, but as a rising force on the world stage. And with the world watching, he set his vision in motion. He strengthened the Navy until it became the second most powerful on Earth. He projected American influence into distant continents, and he attempted one of the greatest engineering feats in human history. A canal, carved through the jungles of Panama, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. When Colombia refused to cooperate, Roosevelt supported Panamanian independence. Within days, Panama became a new nation and granted the United States permission to build its canal. It was a moment that redefined geopolitics. When the Panama Canal opened in 1914, it changed the world in an instant. American ships could now move swiftly between oceans, allowing trade, military power, and influence to flow like never before. The United States, once a cluster of fragile colonies, had become a country whose decisions could alter the fate of nations. And at that very moment, as the canal opened, another sound echoed across the Atlantic. The first shots of World War I. The world was entering an age of global conflict, alliances, revolutions, and industrial warfare. An age where power would no longer be measured by land alone, but by technology, strategy, and economic strength. America, shaped by centuries of chance, courage, conflict, and ambition, now stood ready for a role it had never played before. A world power at the dawn of a new era. The rise of the United States was not a straight line. It was a turbulent journey of empires colliding, continents reshaping, and people seeking freedom on uncharted frontiers. It was the story of revolution and reinvention, of ambition and opportunity, of a nation that began as an overlooked corner of the world and grew into a force that would shape the century to come. And through every twist of history, from Columbus's mistaken voyage to the opening of the Panama Canal, one truth became clear. The destiny of America was never written in advance. It was carved, claimed, fought for, and imagined, one bold decision at a time.